Hey guys, so today we're going to be taking a look at part three of Night, which is part of chapter five and then all of chapter six. So at this point, Ellie has been in the camps for a couple of months. It's the end of summer. And so he's about to kind of experience his first winter in a camp. And, a lot of these camps are in Poland, they're in Austria, they're in Germany, where the winters were punishing. Add to that the fact that they are malnourished, that they don't have enough food, that they don't have enough clothing, that they're poorly treated, that they're being worked to death, that they're terrified all the time. All of those things lead to the fact that there were lots of die-offs in the winter in the camps. And, it was a very kind of difficult time. But so, he's been here for a couple of months and he's kind of become numb to the things that he has seen and the horrible treatment that he's received. Ellie has become a very changed character from the one that we met in the previous section, who was experiencing his first night in camp, and a very different character from whom we met in the first chapter. Okay. The summer was coming to an end. The Jewish year was almost over. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the last day of that cursed year, the entire camp was agitated and every one of us felt the tension. After all, this was a day unlike all others, the last day of the year. The word last had an odd ring to it. What if it really were the last day? The evening meal was distributed, an especially thick soup, but nobody touched it. We wanted to wait until after prayer. On the Appelplatz, surrounded by the electrified barbed wire, thousands of Jews, anguish on their faces, gathered in silence. Night was falling rapidly, and more prisoners kept coming from every block, suddenly able to overcome time and space, to will both into submission. What are you, my God? I thought angrily. How do you compare to this stricken mass, gathered to affirm to you their faith, their anger, their defiance? What does your grandeur mean, Master of the universe, in the face of all this cowardice, this decay, and this misery? Why do you go on troubling these poor people's wounded minds, their ailing bodies? Some 10,000 men had come to participate in a solemn service, including the Blockhelteste, the Capos, all bureaucrats in the service of death. So remember I told you all these people, the Blockhelteste, the Capos, are all also Jews. They're inmates that have just been given power over other inmates. Blessed be the Almighty. The voice of the officiating inmate had just become audible. At first, I thought it was the wind. Blessed be God's name. Thousands of lips repeated the benediction, bent over like trees in a storm. Blessed be God's name. Why? But why would I bless him? Every fiber in me rebelled. Because he caused thousands of children to burn in his mass graves? Because he kept 6 crematoria working day and night, including Sabbath and the holy days? Because in his great might, he had created Auschwitz, Birkenau, Buna, and so many other factories of death? How could I say to him, Blessed be thou, Almighty Master of the universe, who chose us among all other nations to be tortured day and night, to watch as our fathers, our mothers, our brothers end up in the furnaces? Praised be thy holy name for having chosen us to be slaughtered on thine altar? I listened as the inmate's voice rose. It was powerful yet broken, amid the weeping, the sobbing, the sighing of the entire congregation. So we're seeing a huge change in Ellie's faith at this point. We started to see it a little bit in chapter 4 during that Never Shall I Forget, when he talks about how he about how that long night 7 times sealed that murdered my God. So chapter 1, we have a very deeply devout Ellie. He's 13 years old. He goes to synagogue all the time. He's studying Talmud. He wants to study Kabbalah. He prays while he cries while he prays. He's just a really devout 13-year-old kid. And now here, all of a sudden, there's so much anger in him about what he believes God has allowed to happen to him and his people. And it makes it all the more upsetting, I think, for Ellie, because the Jews are thought to be the chosen ones by God. So the fact that he would treat his chosen ones in such a way is something that angers Ellie greatly at this point in the novel. All the earth and universes are God's. He kept pausing as though he lacked the strength to uncover the meaning beneath the text. The melody was stifled in his throat. And I, the former mystic, was thinking, yes, man is stronger, greater than God. When Adam and Eve deceived you, you chased them from paradise. When you were displeased by Noah's generation, you brought down the flood. When Sodom lost your favor, you caused the heavens to rain down fire and damnation. But look at these men whom you have betrayed, allowing them to be tortured, slaughtered, gassed, and burned. What do? They pray before you. They praise your name. All of creation bears witness to the greatness of God. In days gone by, Rosh Hashanah had dominated my life. I knew that my sins grieved the Almighty, and so I pleaded for forgiveness. In those days, I fully believed that the salvation of the world depended on every one of my deeds, on every one of my prayers. But now I no longer pleaded for anything. I was no longer able to lament. On the contrary, I felt very strong. I was the accuser, God the accused. My eyes had opened, and I was alone, terribly alone, in a world without God, without man, without love or mercy. I was nothing but ashes now, but I felt myself to be stronger than this Almighty to whom my life had been bound for so long. In the midst of these men assembled for prayer, I felt like an observer, a stranger. So we're also seeing kind of Ellie's dehumanization, right? He talks about how he's terribly alone in a world without God, without man, right? So this idea that men don't exist anymore because of all the evils that have happened. Without love or mercy, I was nothing but ashes now. So we're really seeing the kind of decay of Ellie's faith, but also his belief in humanity that goes right along with it. So I imagine that must have been very upsetting for him, rather. The service ended with Kaddish. Each of us recited Kaddish for his parents, for his children, and for himself. And remember, Kaddish is that prayer for the dead. We remained standing in the apple plots for a long time, unable to detach ourselves from this surreal moment. Then came the time to go to sleep, and slowly the inmates returned to their blocks. I thought I heard them wishing each other a happy new year. I ran to look for my father. At the same time, I was afraid of having to wish him a happy new year in which I no longer believed. He was leaning against the wall, bent shoulders sagging as if under a heavy load. I went up to him, took his hand, and kissed it. I felt a tear on my hand. Whose was it? Mine? His? I said nothing, nor did he. Never before had we understood each other. Have we understood each other so clearly. The sound of the bell brought us back to reality. We had to go to bed. We came back from very far away. I looked up at my father's face, trying to glimpse a smile or something like it on his stricken face. But there was nothing, not the shadow of an expression. Defeat. So the one kind of positive that comes out of this is Ellie and his father's relationship, right? We're seeing it evolve and grow and strengthen as the novel continues, right? In chapter 1, he and his father are not very close at all. His father is very disconnected. He's more focused on the community. And then when they're put on those cattle cars and taken, and especially when they're separated from the women in the family, then everything changes, right? Ellie's entire focus in this novel after he enters concentration camps is not to lose his father. That's all he cares about, right? And now all of a sudden, they have this deep understanding of each other. They really seem to know each other in a way that is beautiful. It's just so upsetting because of the kind of circumstances of it. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Atonement means to ask for forgiveness for sins. Should we fast? The question was hotly debated. To fast could mean a more certain, more rapid death. In this place, we were always fasting. It was Yom Kippur year round. But there were those who said we should fast precisely because it was dangerous to do so. We needed to show God that even here, locked in hell, we were capable of singing his praises. Fasting is where you don't eat for a kind of an extended period of time to show your religious devotion. I did not fast. First of all, to please my father, who had forbidden me to do so. And then there was no longer any reason for me to fast. I no longer accepted God's silence. As I swallowed my ration of soup, I turned that act into a symbol of rebellion, of protest against him. And I nibbled on my crust of bread. Deep inside me, I felt a great void opening, right? So that emptiness is because it was once filled with his faith, right? And now there's nothing there. So there's nothing to kind of help sustain Ellie through this time. The SS offered us a beautiful present for the new year. We had just returned from work. As soon as we passed the camp's entrance, we sensed something out of the ordinary in the air. The roll call was shorter than usual. The evening soup was distributed at great speed, swallowed as quickly. We were anxious. Oh, sorry, we're going to stop there. So the next part that we're going to be taking a look at is chapter 6. All right, so chapter 6 rather, starts with them actually leaving the camp. So end of chapter 5, we know that the Russians and the Americans are moving forward. The front is moving deeper and deeper into Germany and Poland, and they're liberating camps as they go. So at the end of chapter 5, Ellie ends up with an infection in his foot that makes his foot swell so badly that he ends up having to get surgery. The surgery goes well and everything, but the doctor tells him he'll need about 2 weeks of rest in order to be able to walk on it again. But the camp is going to be liberated and the camp is going to be kind of dissolved in only a couple of days. So Ellie has to make the decision: do he and his father stay in this camp and or do they leave with everybody else? So the worry about staying in the camp is that they thought that there was no way the Germans would let them leave, that they would mine the camp, that they would blow it up, they would kill everybody right before they left, whatever. That there was no way that they would leave kind of a record for the Americans and the Russians to find. And then so then Ellie and his father end up deciding to leave. They think that this would be the smartest thing for them to do, even though Ellie is injured, right? So he's just had surgery on his foot. He can't really walk very well. And they're going on a forced march to a different camp in the middle of winter, right? So like I talked about, the winters here were deeply punishing. So you add all those kinds of things together, and this kind of tells us how desperate Ellie is, how worried he is that they're going to die if he's willing to kind of risk this. The terrible irony of it is that that camp ended up just getting liberated. So he and his father would have been liberated much, much earlier if they had stayed. So it's just kind of one of those horrible things for them to kind of have to deal with, right? Knowing that decision that you made was the wrong one. So we're starting here on page 85. An icy wind was blowing violently, but we marched without faltering. The SS made us increase our pace. Faster, you tramps, you flea-ridden dogs. Why not? Moving faster made us a little warmer. The blood flowed more readily in our veins. We had the feeling of being alive. Faster, you filthy dogs. We were no longer marching. We were running like automatons. The SS were running as well, weapons in hand. We looked as though we were running from them. The night was pitch black. From time to time, a shot exploded in the darkness. They had orders to shoot anyone who could not sustain the pace. Their fingers on the triggers, they did not deprive themselves of the pleasure. If one of us stopped for a second, a quick shot eliminated the filthy dog. And you'll notice the dehumanizing diction that's being used here, right? Calling them flea-ridden dogs, filthy dogs, and shooting them as if they aren't human beings. I was putting one foot in front of the other like a machine. I was dragging this emaciated body that was still such a weight. If only I could have shed it. Though I tried to put it out of my mind, I couldn't help thinking that there were two of us, my body and I hated that body. I kept repeating to myself. Sorry, my computer's really slow. Don't think, don't stop, run. Near me, men were collapsing into the dirty snow, gunshots. A young boy from Poland was marching beside me. His name was Zalman. He had worked in the electrical material depot in Buna. People mocked him because he was forever praying or meditating on some Talmudic question. For him, it was an escape from reality, from feeling the blows. All of a sudden, he had terrible stomach cramps. My stomach aches, he whispered to me. He couldn't go on. He had to stop a moment. I begged him, wait a little, Zalman. Soon we will come to a halt. We cannot run like this to the end of the world. But while running, he began to undo his buttons and yelled to me, I can't go on. My stomach is bursting. Make an effort, Zalman. I can't go on, he groaned. He lowered his pants and fell to the ground. That is the image I have of him. I don't believe that he was finished off by an SS, for nobody had noticed. He must have died, trampled under the feet of the thousands of men who followed us. I soon forgot him. I began to think of myself again. My foot was aching. I shivered with every step. Just a few more meters, and it would all be over. I'll fall. A small red flame, a shot. Death enveloped me. It suffocated me. It stuck to me like glue. I felt I could touch it. The idea of dying, of ceasing to be, began to fascinate me. To no longer exist, to no longer feel this excruciating pain in my foot, to no longer feel anything, neither fatigue nor cold, nothing. To break rank, to let myself slide to the side of the road. My father's presence was the only thing that stopped me. He was running next to me, out of breath, out of strength, desperate. I had no right to let myself die. What would he do without me? I was his sole support. These thoughts were going through my mind as I continued to run, not feeling my numb foot, not even realizing that I was still running, that I still owned a body that galloped down the road among thousands of others. So Ellie's fascination with death here is normal. He's in incredible amounts of pain. I imagine death would feel like a wonderful release to Ellie at this point. But there's one thing that's keeping him alive, one thing, and it's his father. And that's so, so important, again, to that relationship, to what it's being built to, right? The only reason he doesn't allow himself to die, the only reason he doesn't get up is he needs to support his father. Because if he dies, then his father dies. These thoughts were, when I became conscious of myself, I tried to slow my pace somewhat, but there was no way. These human waves were rolling forward and would have crushed me like an ant. By now, I moved like a sleepwalker. I sometimes closed my eyes and it was like running while asleep. Now and then someone kicked me violently from behind and I would wake up. The man in front of me was screaming, "Run faster! If you don't want to move, let us pass you." But all I had to do was close my eyes to see a world pass before me, to dream of another life. The road was endless, to allow oneself to be carried by the mob, to be swept away by blind fate. When the SS were tired, they were replaced, but no one replaced us. Chilled to the bone, our throats parched, famished, out of breath, we pressed on. The road was endless, to allow oneself to be carried by the mob, to be swept away by blind fate. When the SS were tired, they were replaced, but no one replaced us. Chilled to the bone. I'm sorry, I read the part. We were masters of nature, the masters of the world. We had transcended everything, death, fatigue, our natural needs. We were stronger than cold and hunger, stronger than the guns and the desire to die. Doomed and rootless, nothing but numbers. We were the only men on earth. At last, the morning star appeared in the gray sky. A hesitant light began to hover on the horizon. We were exhausted. We had lost all strength, all illusion. The commandant announced that we had already covered 20 kilometers since we left. Long since we had exceeded the limits of fatigue, our legs moved mechanically in spite of us, without us. We came to an abandoned village, not a living soul. So 20 kilometers is over 15 miles. It's like 15 and a half miles. So that is a very long way to run. I don't know if I could run 15 miles right now, and I am not on the verge of death, running in the freezing cold in the snow on a foot that has just been had surgery on, no less. So, it kind of tells you the kind of limitlessness of human endurance when death is kind of the only other option for you. Not a single bark, houses with gaping windows. A few people slipped out of the ranks, hoping to hide in some abandoned building. One more hour of marching, and at last the order to halt. As one man, we let ourselves sink into the snow. My father shook me. "Not here. Get up. A little farther down. There's a shed over there. Come." I had neither the desire nor the resolve to get up, yet I obeyed. It was not really a shed, but a brick factory whose roof had fallen in. Its window panes were shattered, its walls covered in soot. It was not easy to get inside. Hundreds of prisoners jostled one another at the door. We finally succeeded in entering. Inside, too, the snow was thick. I let myself slide to the ground. Only now did I feel the full extent of my weakness. The snow seemed to me like a very soft, very warm carpet. I fell asleep. I don't know how long I slept, a few minutes or 1 hour. When I woke up, a frigid hand was tapping my cheeks. I tried to open my eyes. It was my father. So here, Ellie is experiencing hypothermia, right? So one of the kind of late stages of hypothermia is when you actually start to feel warm. They found people that were found frozen to death in snowstorms or in avalanches, had actually removed clothing because they felt hot. So it's kind of one of those weird paradoxical things that happens with hypothermia. And so his father is waking him up. His father is making sure he goes somewhere different. He's making sure he goes inside where it's a little bit warmer. So his father's, taking care of him. He's playing that role of the father, which is important. How he had aged since last night. His body was completely twisted, shriveled up into himself. His eyes were glazed over, his lips parched, decayed. Everything about him expressed total exhaustion. His voice was damp from tears and snow. Don't let yourself be overcome by sleep, Eliezer. It's dangerous to fall asleep in the snow. Or one falls asleep forever. Come, my son, come, get up. Get up. How could I? How was I to leave this warm blanket? I was hearing my father's words, but their meaning escaped me. If he had asked me to carry the entire shed on my arms, come, my son, come. I got up with clenched teeth. Holding on to me with one arm, he led me outside. It was not easy. It was as difficult to go out as to come in. Beneath our feet, there lay men, crushed, trampled underfoot, dying. Nobody paid attention to them. We were outside. The icy wind whipped my face. I was constantly biting my lips so that they wouldn't freeze. All around me what appeared to be a dance of death. My head was reeling. I was walking through a cemetery. Among the stiffened corpses, there were logs of wood. Not a sound of distress, not a plaintive cry, nothing but mass agony and silence. Nobody asked anyone for help. One died because one had to. No point in making trouble. To me, that's one of the saddest things in this novel is this idea that people are dying and they're not even asking for anything because they know that there's nothing that can be done for them. The people that might have pity for them, the other prisoners, have their own survival and the fact that they're about to die weighing on them, and the guards wouldn't care. So it's just kind of this powerlessness that is so painful to read. I saw myself in every stiffened corpse. Soon I wouldn't even be seeing them anymore. I would be one of them. A matter of hours. Come, Father, let's go back to the shed. He didn't answer. He was not even looking at the dead. Come, Father, it's better there. You'll be able to lie down. We'll take turns. I'll watch over you and you'll watch over me. We won't let each other fall asleep. We'll look after each other. He accepted. After trampling over many bodies and corpses, we succeeded in getting inside. We let ourselves fall to the ground. Don't worry, son. Go to sleep. I'll watch over you. You first, Father. Sleep. He refused. I stretched out and tried to sleep, to doze a little, but in vain. God knows what I would have given to be able to sleep a few moments. But deep inside, I knew that to slumber meant to die. And something in me rebelled against that death which was settling in all around me, silently, gently. It would seize upon a sleeping person, steal into him, and devour him bit by bit. Next to me, someone was trying to awaken his neighbor, his brother perhaps, or his comrade. In vain. And here we have this kind of personification again of death, right? Talking about how it's settling in around silently, gently. There's something almost warm and welcoming about this death, which is different than what we're used to. Usually we see death as an antagonist. But, here it's this idea that death would be so much more simple, so much easier, so much more comfortable than what they're going through right now. Defeated, he lay down too next to the corpse and also fell asleep. Who would wake him up? Reaching out with my arm, I touched him. Wake up. One mustn't fall asleep here. He half opened his eyes. No advice. His voice a whisper. I'm exhausted. Mind your business. Leave me alone. My father, too, was gently dozing. I couldn't see his eyes. His cap was covering his face. Wake up, I whispered in his ear. He woke with a start. He sat up, bewildered, stunned, like an orphan. He looked all around him, taking it all in as if he had suddenly decided to make an inventory of his universe, to determine where he was and how and why he was there. Then he smiled. I shall always remember that smile. What world did it come from? Heavy snow continued to fall over the corpses. The door of the shed opened. An old man appeared. His mustache was covered with ice. His lips were blue. It was Rabbi Eliyahu, who had headed a small congregation in Poland. A very kind man, beloved by everyone in the camp, even by the kapos and the Baal Teste. Despite the ordeals and deprivations, his face continued to radiate his innocence. He was the only rabbi whom nobody ever failed to address as rabbi in Buna. He looked like one of those prophets of old, always in the midst of his people when they needed to be consoled. And strangely, his words never provoked anyone. They did bring peace. As he entered the shed, his eyes, brighter than ever, seemed to be searching for someone. Perhaps someone here has seen my son? He had lost his son in the commotion. He had searched for him among the dying to no avail. Then he had dug through the snow to find his body, in vain. For 3 years, they had stayed close to one another. Side by side, they had endured the suffering, the blows, they had waited for their ration of bread, and they had prayed. 3 years from camp to camp, from selection to selection, and now, when the end seemed near, fate had separated them. When he came near me, Rabbi Eliyahu whispered, "It happened on the road. We lost sight of one another during the journey. I fell behind a little at the rear of the column. I didn't have the strength to run anymore, and my son didn't notice. That's all I know. Where has he disappeared? Where can I find him? Perhaps you've seen him somewhere?" "No, Rabbi Eliyahu, I haven't seen him." And so he left as he had come, a shadow swept away by the wind. He had already gone through the door when I remembered that I had noticed his son running beside me. I had forgotten, and so had not mentioned it to Rabbi Eliyahu. But then I remembered something else. His son had seen him losing ground, sliding back to the rear of the column. He had seen him, and he had continued to run in front, letting the distance between them become greater. A terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he had wanted to be rid of his father? He had felt his father growing weaker, and believing that the end was near, had thought by this separation to free himself of a burden that could diminish his own chance for survival. It was good that I had forgotten all that.
Sorry for the interruption. The lunches are not...
Sorry about that. It was good that I had forgotten all that, and I was glad that Rabbi Eliyahu continued to search for his beloved son. So here we're seeing a pair of a father-son pair that's very similar to Eli and his father, right? The rabbi and his son have been together in the camps for 3 years. They've always stuck by each other. They would keep each other alive. And then here, all of a sudden, at the end, the son of the rabbi sees his father getting weaker and weaker, and he believes that maybe he'd be better off without him, that he'd be able to survive a little bit better without him. And he leaves him behind. So Eli, right, obviously has not reached that point. He's staying alive specifically for his father. So what we call this is a foil, right? It's a character that provides contrast. So the fact that the rabbi and his son are kind of the opposite of Eli and his father right now is kind of important. And in spite of myself, a prayer formed inside me, a prayer to this God in whom I no longer believed. O God, master of the universe, give me the strength never to do what Rabbi Eliyahu's son has done. There was shouting outside in the courtyard. Night had fallen and the SS were ordering us to form ranks. We started to march once more. The dead remained in the yard, under the snow without even a marker, like fallen guards. No one recited Kaddish over them. Sons had abandoned the remains of their fathers without a tear. On the road, it snowed and snowed. It snowed endlessly. We were marching more slowly. Even the guards seemed tired. My wounded foot no longer hurt, probably frozen. I felt I had lost that foot. It had become detached from me like a wheel fallen off a car. Never mind. I had to accept the fact I would have to live with only one leg. The important thing was not to dwell on it, especially now. Leave those thoughts for later. Our column had lost all appearance of discipline. Everyone walked as he wished, as he could. No more gunshots. Our guards surely were tired. But death hardly needed their help. The cold was conscientiously doing its work. At every step, somebody fell down and ceased to suffer. From time to time, SS officers on motorcycles drove the length of the column to shake off the growing apathy. Hold on, we're almost there. Courage, just a few more hours. We're arriving in Glivitz. These words of encouragement, even coming as they did from the mouths of our assassins, were of great help. Nobody wanted to give up now, just before the end, so close to our destination. Our eyes searched the horizon for the barbed wire of Glivitz. Our only wish was to arrive there quickly. By now it was night. It had stopped snowing. We marched a few more hours before we arrived. We saw the camp only when we stood right in front of its gate. The capos quickly settled us into the barrack. There was shoving and jostling as if this were the ultimate haven, the gateway to life. People trod over numbed bodies, trampled wounded faces. There were no cries, only a few moans. My father and I were thrown to the ground by this rolling tide. From beneath me, I heard a desperate cry. You're crushing me, have mercy. The voice was familiar. You're crushing me, mercy, have mercy. The same faint voice, the same cry I'd heard somewhere before. The voice had spoken to me one day. When? Years ago? No, it must have been in the camp. Mercy! Knowing that I was crushing him, preventing him from breathing, I wanted to get up and disengage myself to allow him to breathe. But I myself was crushed under the weight of other bodies. I had difficulty breathing. I dug my nails into unknown faces. I was biting my way through, searching for air. No one cried out. Suddenly, I remembered Juliek, the boy from Warsaw who played the violin in the Buna Orchestra. Juliek, is that you? Eliezer, the 25 whiplashes. Yes, I remember. He fell silent. A long moment went by. Juliek, can you hear me? Juliek. Yes, he said feebly. What do you want? He was not dead. Are you all right, Juliek? I asked, less to know his answer than to hear him speak, to know he was alive. All right, Eliezer, all right. Not too much air. Tired. My feet are swollen. It's good to rest. But my violin. I thought he'd lost his mind. His violin here? What about your violin? He was gasping. I'm afraid they'll break my violin. I brought it with me. I could not answer him. Someone had lain down on top of me, smothering me. I couldn't breathe through my mouth or my nose. Sweat was running down my forehead and my back. This was it, the end of the road, a silent death, suffocation, no way to scream, to call for help. I tried to rid myself of my invisible assassin. My whole desire to live became concentrated in my nails. I scratched. I fought for a breath of air. I tore at decaying flesh that did not respond. I could not free myself of that mass weighing down my chest. Who knows? Was I struggling with a dead man? I shall never know. All I can say is that I prevailed. I succeeded in digging a small hole in that wall of dead and dying people, a small hole through which I could drink a little air. This is also, to me, deeply heartbreaking. We have all these people that are dying just because they're too weak to not crush each other to death, right? There's no malice in this. There's not even any fear or desperation. It's just they are so weak, they're so tired that they cannot keep themselves upright any longer. And they're just crushing anybody who follows underneath them with this kind of press of bodies of everybody trying to get into the barracks. Father, are you there? I asked as soon as I was able to utter a word. I knew he could not be far from me. Yes, a voice replied from far away, as if from another world. I'm trying to sleep. He was trying to sleep. Could one fall asleep here? Wasn't it dangerous to lower one's guard even for a moment when death could strike at any time? Those were my thoughts when I heard the sound of a violin. A violin in a dark barrack where the dead were piled on top of the living. Who was this madman who played the violin here at the edge of his own grave? Or was it hallucination? It had to be Juliek. He was playing a fragment of a Beethoven concerto. Never before had I heard such a beautiful sound in such silence. How had he succeeded in disengaging himself to slip out from under my body without my feeling it? The darkness enveloped us. All I could hear was the violin, and it was as if Juliek's soul had become his bow. He was playing his life. His whole being was gliding over the strings, his unfulfilled hopes, his charred past, his extinguished future. He played that which he would never play again. I shall never forget Juliek. How could I forget this concert given before an audience of the dead and dying? Even today, when I hear that particular piece by Beethoven, my eyes close, and out of the darkness emerges the pale and melancholy face of my Polish comrade, bidding farewell to an audience of dying men. I don't know how long he played. I was overcome by sleep. When I awoke at daybreak, I saw Juliek facing me, hunched over, dead. Next to him lay his violin, trampled, an eerily poignant little corpse. This is my favorite passage of this entire novel. It's so beautiful and so heartbreaking all at the same time. So Ellie meets Juliek in chapter 4 or 5, and he's a musician. He plays in the orchestra at the camp, and he has been forbidden from playing Beethoven because Beethoven was a German composer, and the Nazis believed that the Jews couldn't play him appropriately, so they were forbidden playing Beethoven. So this act is kind of this like last little rebellion, right? It's this moment where he can kind of rebel against the SS and play that which he wasn't supposed to play. And it's also, you know, the violin is a symbol of himself, of his soul, right? He's kept it safe, despite the fact that it was probably a burden to do so. You know, this kid is on the verge of dying at all times, and what he's really worried about is his violin, right? It's a symbol of what his life used to be, of his past. And then, as Ellie says, his charred past, his extinguished future, right? The fact that, you know, he's going to die and that this is going to all end. We stayed in Gleivitz for 3 days without food or water. We were forbidden to leave the barrack. The door was guarded by the SS. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty and disheveled, to judge by what the others looked like. The bread we had brought from Buna had been devoured long since, and who knew when we would be given another ration? The front followed us. We could again hear the cannons very close by, but we no longer had the strength or courage to think that the Germans would run out of time, that the Russians would reach us before we could be evacuated. We learned that we'd be moved to the center of Germany. On the 3rd day at dawn, we were driven out of the barrack. We threw blankets over our shoulders like prayer shawls. We were directed to a gate that divided the camp in two. A group of SS officers stood waiting. A word flew through our ranks: selection. The SS officers were doing the selection, the weak to the left, those who walked well to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. An SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back!" I inched my way through the crowd. Several SS men rushed to find me, creating such confusion that a number of people were able to switch over to the right, among them my father and I. Still, there were gunshots, and some dead. I think that's such an important sentence. Still, there were gunshots, and some dead. I think Ellie says this with such detachment because he caused those deaths, right? In going over to get his father from the left side and moving him over to the right, he creates so much commotion and stuff like that that people who may not have died ended up dying because of what he did. But again, I think for Ellie, the only thing that matters is his father, right? That is the most important thing. I inched my way through we were led out of the camp. After a half-hour march, we arrived in the very middle of a field crossed by railroad tracks. This was where we would wait for the train's arrival. Snow was falling heavily. We were forbidden to sit down or to move. A thick layer of snow was accumulating on our blankets. We were given bread, the usual ration. We threw ourselves on it. Someone had the idea of quenching his thirst by eating snow. Soon we were all imitating him. As we were not permitted to bend down, we took out our spoons and ate the snow off our neighbors' backs. A mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS men who were watching were greatly amused by the spectacle. The hours went by. Our eyes were tired from staring at the horizon, waiting for the liberating train to appear. It arrived only very late that evening, an infinitely long train composed of roofless cattle cars. The SS shoved us inside, 100 per car. We were so skinny. When everybody was on board, the convoy left. So significance here is when Ellie and his family first leave Siget, they only fit 80 to a car, and it's like packed. Nobody can lie down all at the same time. So the fact that they can now fit 20 more people onto these cars shows, you know, just how emaciated and how kind of terrible they are. Okay. We'll continue with part 4 here very soon. I'll see you guys later. Bye.